Robert Pattinson's story is not the story of an overnight success or a man who comfortably fit into fame. It is the story of someone who was misunderstood, mocked, underestimated, worshipped, and nearly trapped by the very success millions. Dream of a boy from London who once felt invisible, awkward, and unsure of his place in the world, growing up without any clear vision of becoming a global icon, struggling with confidence, expelled from school for stealing magazines, drifting through his teenage years playing guitar on the streets, performing in small pubs, unsure whether acting was even a real future for him, feeling like an outsider even in his own life, until small moments began shaping his destiny. His early acting roles barely noticed, his face unknown, his name irrelevant, his talent quietly growing in the shadows, and then suddenly the world changed when Twilight happened, a role that exploded his life in ways no one could have prepared him for, turning him into one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. Almost overnight, millions screaming his name, paparazzi following every breath, fans projecting fantasies onto him, and yet inside he felt increasingly lost, boxed, and misunderstood. Because fame didn't feel like freedom, it felt like a cage. Critics dismissed him as a pretty face, audiences reduced him to one character, and Hollywood tried to mold him into something safe and sellable. But Robert Pattinson was never meant to be safe. He was never meant to stay inside someone else's expectations, and instead of enjoying the comfort of easy money and repetitive roles, he quietly made one of the bravest decisions an actor can make, to destroy his own image in order to rebuild his soul, choosing strange, risky, independent films that confused people, angered studios, and scared his own fans, working with directors who valued art over profit, accepting roles that made him uncomfortable, unglamorous, and even ugly. Because he understood something most people never do, that real respect is earned through courage, not applause. And during this phase he faced harsh criticism, career uncertainty, financial risk, and constant doubt. Yet he kept moving forward, learning, evolving, sharpening his craft, transforming himself from a teenage heartthrob into a serious actor with depth, intensity, and fearlessness, proving through films like Cosmopolis, Good Time, The Lighthouse, and others that talent always survives trends, that authenticity outlives hype, and that reinvention is the ultimate power in any creative life. And as the years passed, the same industry that once mocked him began to admire him. Critics reversed their opinions, filmmakers sought him out, and audiences slowly realized that Robert Pattinson was never running away from fame. He was running toward truth, toward mastery, toward becoming the kind of artist who controls his own narrative, not someone controlled by it. And this journey wasn't clean or comfortable. It was messy, lonely, and uncertain, but it was real, and that is what makes his story so powerful. Because it teaches that success without purpose feels empty, that courage often looks like self-destruction from the outside, and that sometimes the only way to become who you truly are is to disappoint everyone who wants you to stay the same. Asterisk as Robert Pattinson pushed deeper into unfamiliar territory. He began to understand that isolation was not his enemy but his teacher, because stepping away from the spotlight meant losing validation, losing certainty, and facing the uncomfortable silence where self-doubt lives, a silence most people avoid, but one he chose to sit with, learning to trust his instincts even when no one else did, because every risky role he accepted carried the possibility of failure, ridicule, or complete invisibility, yet he kept choosing discomfort over stagnation, artistry over safety, depth over popularity, and through this period he became obsessed with understanding human fragility, brokenness, obsession, and madness, not as performance but as truth, dissolving the barrier between actor and character, until he was no longer pretending but transforming, which is why his performances began to feel unsettling, raw, and unforgettable. Because they weren't designed to be liked, they were designed to be honest, and honesty often makes people uneasy, especially in an industry addicted to perfection. And while many assumed he was sabotaging his career, he was actually building something far more durable than fame, a reputation rooted in bravery, discipline, and artistic integrity. And slowly the narrative shifted. Critics who once dismissed him began praising his intensity, directors trusted him with complex material, and audiences started to see past the shadow of Twilight, realizing that true growth often happens when no one is cheering, when you are walking forward without applause, guided only by belief in your own evolution. And during this time, Robert Pattinson spoke openly about anxiety, insecurity, and the pressure of expectations, not as weakness but as reality, reminding people that confidence is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. And this honesty resonated deeply with a generation tired of polished perfection, people who felt trapped in roles assigned to them by society, family, or circumstance, seeing in him a mirror of their own struggle to break free. And when opportunities finally aligned again on a larger scale, he was no longer the same man who entered fame unprepared. He had developed emotional armor, creative clarity, and the wisdom to say no, which allowed him to choose projects with intention rather than desperation, culminating in his return to mainstream cinema, not as a manufactured star but as a fully realized artist, someone who had earned his place through patience and persistence, proving that reinvention is not betrayal of success, but its highest form, and that sometimes stepping backward in the public eye is the only way to move forward in your life. By the time Robert Pattinson stepped into roles that demanded not just performance but complete psychological surrender, he had already detached his identity from public approval, which allowed him to approach fame with a rare calm, no longer chasing validation but treating each project as an exploration rather than a statement. And this shift in mindset marked a true turning point of his life, because when an artist stops proving and starts discovering, the work becomes timeless. And nowhere was this more visible than in the way he approached characters who were flawed, unstable, or morally ambiguous, embracing imperfection as the core of humanity rather than something to be hidden. And in doing so, he challenged the audience to confront discomfort within themselves, making his performances linger long after the screen faded to black. And when he was finally cast as Batman, a role loaded with impossible expectations, skepticism, and public doubt, he didn't respond with defensiveness or ego. He responded with silence and work, understanding that no argument is louder than excellence. And once again, the cycle repeated itself. The internet mocked, fans complained, comparisons exploded, and predictions of failure flooded the noise, yet Robert Pattinson had already lived this story before. He knew that doubt is often the shadow of something meaningful, and instead of reshaping himself to please, he leaned deeper into his understanding of isolation, trauma, and inner conflict, transforming Batman not into a symbol of perfection but a reflection of grief, obsession, and unresolved pain, which ultimately silenced critics and reminded the world why reinvention requires emotional risk. And beyond the roles, his personal philosophy became clearer. He spoke about creativity as survival, about fear as fuel, about not knowing as a powerful place to begin, encouraging people to accept uncertainty instead of resisting it, because clarity often comes after movement, not before it. And this message resonated beyond cinema, touching anyone who had ever felt trapped by expectations, misunderstood by labels, or afraid to start over, because Robert Pattinson's journey was no longer just about acting. It was about permission to change, to disappoint others, to walk away from comfort, and to rebuild yourself quietly while the world assumes you're lost. And through patience, discipline, and relentless self-honesty, he proved that success is not defined by consistency of image but by consistency of growth, that the bravest thing you can do is become unfamiliar to those who only knew an older version of you, and that true mastery arrives when you stop asking who you are supposed to be and start becoming who you actually are. Robert Pattinson moved further into the later chapters of his career. Something subtle yet powerful became visible in the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that didn't seek approval, a calm that came from surviving both extreme adoration and intense rejection, because few people experience both at such scale and live to redefine themselves. And this duality shaped his worldview, teaching him that praise and criticism are equally unreliable guides, and that the only compass worth following is internal truth, which is why he began choosing projects that explored existential themes, loneliness, obsession, identity, and the cost of ambition, not because they were fashionable, but because they reflected questions he himself had wrestled with. And this alignment between life and art created performances that felt deeply personal yet universally relatable, reminding viewers that everyone, no matter how successful, struggles with meaning at some point. And through interviews and rare moments of reflection, he revealed a philosophy grounded in humility, curiosity, and self-awareness, openly admitting confusion, fear,